Hello again, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of Hockey on the Spot with Brandon Barenfeld. I'm Brandon Barenfeld. Thank you all for joining me again. This is episode 142 of Hockey on the Spot. I hope everyone's doing well. This is going to be episode number 2 that I'm going to be doing today. This is my second episode of the day. And for this episode, I'm going to talk about today's team with the NHL's 30 teams in 30 days, the Nashville Predators. For the last video, the Winnipeg Jets were yesterday's team. For this episode, it'll be today's team, which is the Nashville Predators. So let's not waste any more time. Let's talk about today's team, the Nashville Predators. For the Nashville Predators, it was kind of a year where they went into the year and they really thought that they had the makings of a playoff team. And honestly, I thought they had the making of a playoff team as well. But unfortunately, the Nashville Predators were victimized by the injury bug in a different kind of way. It wasn't like the majority of their roster was injured and they had to bring up a bunch of players. It wasn't an injury bug in that sense. It was an injury bug in the sense that they would lose their starting goaltender and all-star goaltender, Pekka Rinne, and they lost him for the majority of the season, and that pretty much set the tone for what the rest of their season would look like. And so by losing Pekka Rinne, they would fail to make the playoffs, but they still, in my opinion, did pretty well for a team that was without a starting goalie. Carter Hutton was the goalie that would pretty much act as the starter in his absence. He was signed over last year from the Chicago Blackhawks. And last year, through 40 games, he actually played really well. 20 wins, 11 losses, and 4 overtime losses with 1 shutout. So he played really well. He had a .910 goals against average and a .910 save percentage and a .262 goals against average. So he played really well. They had Marek Mazanec called up pretty much as the backup. And even he, I felt, played a significant role with the team last year, playing some of the games that Hutton didn't play. Hey, even though he had a losing record, 8 wins, 10 losses, 4 overtime losses. He had 2 shutouts, though. And he had a .902 save percentage and a .280 goals against average. So, I may have over-exaggerated with Marek Mazanec, but I think for a goalie that never played in the NHL before, that's actually decent. Not the best, obviously, but it could have been a lot worse. And as far as Pekka Rinne himself was concerned, through the games he did play, he only played 24. He had 10 wins, 10 losses, and 3 overtime losses with 2 shutouts, a .277 goals against average, and a .902 save percentage. So for Pekka Rinne, it probably would have been a good year for him had he not gotten hurt. He looked like a goaltender, ready for the year to begin. And he basically just looked ready for the regular season. I mean, he lost 3 of his first 4 games, but then he really started to take off, and then October 22nd against the Minnesota Wild is when he got hurt. He let up 1 goal in what was a 2-0 loss, and that was just a rough hit for Pekka Rinne to go down the way he did. And he ended up not coming back until March 4th against the Pittsburgh Penguins, and when he came back, he just was not himself, which you could pretty much expect from a goaltender who's just coming back from injury. But ultimately, the injury to their star goaltender caused the team to miss the playoffs for the 2nd straight year. However, their record was actually not that bad. 38, 32, and 12 for 88 points in the, Western Conference, without their starting goaltender. That's a pretty good record to have when you don't have your starting goaltender for the majority of the season. Again, 38, 32, and 12 88 points. And that's good. It was good enough for 10th in the Western Conference, which is actually really, really good. However, the only downside is that was only good enough for 6th in the Central Division, and in this league, with the new setup, only up to 5 teams per division can get into the playoffs. And the Preds, they failed to make the playoffs, I believe. By failing to make the playoffs, they were the 10th seed, as I said. But I don't think they really missed the playoffs by much. They only finished 3 points behind the Dallas Stars and 1 point behind the Phoenix Coyotes for 9th. And they still had one more win than the Coyotes, but one less point. So I think it was a good season for Nashville, even though they missed the playoffs. It wasn't like they had a losing record. They were nowhere near as bad as they were in the lockout shortened year, and they showed potential last year. They really did. So, not a lot of negative things to look at from last year. Just the fact that they missed their starting goalie, Pekka Rinne. Oh, and of course, they once again were not a very good offensive team, even though they had 4 different 20-goal scorers for the second time since 2007-2008. Obviously, at the trade deadline, they would end up dealing pretty much their franchise player in David Legwand to the Detroit Red Wings. So that was one change they made in showing that they were not confident that they were going to be in the playoffs. But Nashville, one thing they did feel was that they need to get better in certain areas, particularly up front. This is a team that was absolutely set on the defensive end, because their defense is pretty much set. It's offense where the changes needed to be made. And they made a lot of changes. The one change, however, that was made on defense is that Michael Del Zotto would not be back. He was not qualified as a restricted free agent, and therefore he was allowed to become an unrestricted free agent and sign a 1-year deal with the Philadelphia Flyers. They also lost Simon Moser, a young Swiss player who has a lot of expectations coming up. However, the Nashville fans, do not worry. This is not a permanent loss. This is just a loss for this season and this season only. He's going back to Switzerland for 1 year, and then he'll probably come back and re-sign with the Nashville Predators. And I really hope he comes back soon, because this guy is a star in the making. Or maybe not a star, but at the very least, a top 6 forward. He was so good in the Olympics for Team Switzerland last year. He was the only American Hockey League player who played in the Olympics last year. But he has a lot of potential, and Simon Moser is going to go overseas to kind of develop the areas of his game that maybe need development, and then he'll come back over to North America next year and be back with the Nashville Predators. It's not going to be like an Alexander Radulov situation where they're going to lose him for the rest of his career, with the exception of a short stint comeback. And they also lost forward Patrick Eaves, one of their trade deadline acquisitions in the David Legwand trade. He went on to sign with the Dallas Stars. They were not bringing him back anyway. But really the big change came for the Nashville Predators via trade. And they made one of the biggest trades this offseason, probably the 3rd biggest trade this offseason so far. And that trade included sending away hard-nosed scorer Patrick Hornquist and two-way forward Nick Spaulding, who was at the time a restricted free agent who was slated to go to arbitration. And both of them were traded to the Pittsburgh Penguins, and then, of course, Nick Spaulding was eventually signed by the Pittsburgh Penguins before it even reached arbitration. And the player the Nashville Predators got in return was also their big offseason acquisition, James Neal. Now, James Neal is a very interesting player. Again, he's coming over from the Pittsburgh Penguins in that deal. And though he may not be as hard-nosed of a player as Patrick Ornquist or as good of a defensive player as Nick Spaulding, this is a better all-around scorer. This guy is a legitimate sniper, and he is a former 40-goal scorer as well back in 2011-2012, when he had 40 goals, 41 assists, and 81 points in 80 games. But he's always a plus player, this guy. Last year was his best year in the plus-minus department, a plus 15, and through 59 games, played 27 goals, 34 assists, and 61 points, 55 penalty minutes, and 238 shots on goal, which tells you that if he was healthy for the full season, and he missed 23 games due to suspensions and injuries combined. He was injured a couple times, but he was also suspended a bunch of times. But if he had played the full season, he probably would have exceeded the 40-goal mark. The big concern came in the playoffs. He was not very good in the playoffs, even though he was a +2. Which means he was okay defensively. He's not known for being a defensive player. He's known for being an offensive player. And through 13 playoff games, only 2 goals, only 2 assists, and only 4 points. And he had though he did generate 49 shots on goal. He shot the puck a lot, but he had 24 penalty minutes. This is a forward, even though he's a very good player, very gifted sniper, and he's going to increase the value of Nashville's offense tenfold. He could go on to be their best offensive player this season. But despite that, this guy has developed a very nasty reputation throughout the National Hockey League at taking stupid penalties, particularly offensive zone penalties. And, it's just was not a good... That was one of the big reasons why the Pittsburgh Penguins just could not keep him. He was not helping them by taking those stupid penalties. And honestly, there have been many arguments about this trade because a lot of people are saying that the only reason he was putting up the kind of numbers that he was putting up was because he was playing alongside a very talented superstar in Evgeny Malkin. Now he comes to a Nashville Predators team that really doesn't have that in a superstar center, and whoever he plays with is not going to be as good as feeding him the puck as Evgeny Malkin was. I can see the arguments there, and I can see why his numbers may not be as good as they were in Pittsburgh. But I think this is a good deal. As far as I could tell at the moment, Nashville gets the better of this trade until the season says otherwise. That's my opinion. That's pretty much my take on it. Other additions for the Nashville Predators included bringing in 3 centers because of another subtraction that I almost forgot to mention, but this is more of a subtraction in a different right. They lost centerman Mike Fisher, and he could be out for a very long time because of an injury. He got injured during the offseason and required surgery, and he could end up missing 2 to 6 months. His estimated return time is between November and January. And even longer than that. He may not even come back until March. You can never tell these injuries these days. I don't remember exactly what injury it was, and I'm not going to start going back to look up what it was. But the point being, Mike Fisher, one of their better centermen, they lost him for most of the year, and who knows if he'll even play even when he does come back, Besides, last season, what did he do last year? Last year was okay. Last year was a pretty good year for him. 20 goals, 29 assists, 49 points through 75 games. But he was a -4. But he did generate 177 shots on goal. And he had 60 penalty minutes. So it wasn't his career year, but it definitely was a solid year for Mike Fisher. So not to mention he's a very good penalty killer for them. So yeah, he'll be missed in that area. But now you got to wonder what's going to happen to him even when he does come back, because they signed in a slew of centermen, not just because of the Mike Fisher injury, but also because of a trade that they wanted to make but ended up not being able to make. They sought out to acquire centerman Jason Spezza from the Ottawa Senators, and they had a pretty good deal in place to get him, but they could not get him, and was not willing to waive his no trade clause to go there. He ended up going to the division rival Dallas Stars. Nashville also had to suffer seeing Paul Stastny go to another division rival in the St. Louis Blues. So they lost two centermen that they were very much interested in obtaining. I don't think they were ever really in it for Ryan Kessler. I don't think they really wanted him. But they lost out on two potential top-line centers in Paul Stastny and Jason Spezza. So with that being said, plus the Mike Fisher injury, they sought out to sign in a slew of centermen that are all getting older now, but all make this center group all the deeper. They brought in centerman Mike Ribeiro from the Phoenix Coyotes, now the Arizona Coyotes, after he was bought out via regular buyout. He may be the biggest signing among the three centers they signed. All three centers they signed were signed to one-year deals, bridge deals more or less, to come back and try to prove themselves. Mike Ribeiro could be the biggest one. He's going to be the one playing on the top line, and he's going to be reunited with James Neal. The two of them had chemistry together when they both were members of the Dallas Stars. So Mike Ribeiro is a guy, and Mike Ribeiro, when he's playing at his best, is a guy who can just make players all around him better. He just makes players around him better. He's not going to give Neal the same offensive numbers that Malkin gave him, but I think he'll give him solid enough offensive numbers that'll make the Nashville Predators coaching staff very, very happy. No, but there's a big risk with signing Mike Ribeiro because of some of the problems that he's had recently off the ice and even on the ice, and his attitude problems with the Coyotes. It just didn't work out there. He wasn't happy there. He was signed to a 4-year deal there, and then he was bought out not by compliance buyout but by regular buyout because of how things were going. Through 80 games last year, 16 goals, 31 points, 31 assists, and 47 points. The goals, he never really was a big-time goal scorer, so I can understand the 16 goals, but the 31 assists, that's very low for a guy like Mike Ribeiro, and so is the 47 points, and he was a minus 13 last year, which is a career low for him, actually. That's a career low for him in plus-minus. 52 penalty minutes and only 110 shots on goal. So, not a good season last year for Mike Ribeiro, and he wasn't happy playing with the Coyotes either. This is a guy who they are really hoping could play more like the way he played when he was with the Washington Capitals. When he played all 48 games in the lockout short here for them, had 13 goals, 36 assists, and 49 points in 48 games. He was a minus 4 that year, but offensively he was so good for them. He had 53 penalty minutes only. He only generated 63 shots on goal, but that doesn't matter. He's more of a passer anyway. And in the playoffs with the Capitals, he played all 7 games. He only had 1 goal and 1 assist, was a minus 2, 10 penalty minutes, and only 13 shots on goal. However, that 1 goal he scored was the Game 5 overtime winner that year against the New York Rangers, which was a big goal, and it gave the Caps a 3-2 series lead. So he's very much missed in Washington, even to this very day. They wanted to re-sign him. They couldn't. He ended up going to the Coyotes, signing a big 4-year deal there. Did not play well, wasn't happy there, and had off-ice issues as well. Was bought out by regular buyout, and now he's in Nashville. And again, He's 34 years of age, so he isn't getting any younger. He's now out of his prime officially. He's out of his prime officially. But, I think if he ends up being happy with his surroundings and under the new head coach, which we'll talk about after I talk about the other additions, then he'll be fine and he'll give some major production to a guy like James Neal and potentially Craig Smith if he plays on that line. The other centers that were brought in, they brought in Olli Jokinen from the Winnipeg Jets. They signed him to a one-year deal. Olli Jokinen, he's even older than Mike Ribeiro. He's 35. So the days of him being a dynamic offensive player have officially come to an end. He showed it in Winnipeg the last 2 years, particularly the lockout-shortened year. Last year wasn't his best year. He was their third-line center. He had 18 goals, 25 assists, 43 points, and was a -8. And, he really didn't look like a player that was too thrilled playing in Winnipeg. Now he comes to Nashville, but he is out to prove himself. He wants to be the best player he can be. I don't know if that's going to happen with a more defensive-oriented team like Nashville. I see him more as their third-line center, even though he could be good enough to be their second-line center. But we'll see. We'll see how things turn out for Olli Jokinen. And then the third center they brought in was Derek Roy, who's coming over from the St. Louis Blues. Derek Roy has not been the same player. He's the youngest of that group. He's 31 years of age, so he's still in his prime. But he did not have a good year last year for the Blues at all. 75 games played, just 9 goals, just 28 assists, and just 37 points. He was also a -1. He only had 30 penalty minutes, so he wasn't in the box very much. And he did generate 114 shots on goal. But those 9 goals and 28 assists and 37 points is a big concern for a player who, despite his 5'9", 184-pound frame, possesses a lot of talent. This is a very talented player. And so it's kind of surprising to see him put up so few points. And in the playoffs last year, he only played 4 of the Blues' 6 games and only 1 assist, no goals, -2, and only 9 shots on goal. He was very unmotivated in the playoffs, and he was not a very good player for the Blues. He became their third-line center, and I think he eventually even became their fourth-line center. He wasn't even in the lineup a couple times. He was scratched on a couple of occasions. And he could very well be a healthy scratch to begin the year for the Nashville Predators. But if he does come back and prove himself and maybe be more like a second or top-line center, he could battle Mike Ribeiro for that honor. This could be a steal of a pickup for the Nashville Predators. Because like I said, he's still relatively young. He's only 31, so he's still got a few years left of his prime, a couple of years to turn it, which is a couple of years to turn his game around. Because he has so much talent, he's a good playmaker, very nifty hands. So to see him not playing as well since that injury he had with the Buffalo Sabres, to see him not the same since that injury is just kind of mind-boggling to me. I just don't like how stuff like that happens. But it did happen to Derek Roy, who was once considered to be one of the best players in the game today up until that injury. So, I hope it works out for Nashville because I do respect this franchise a lot. I really hope Derek Roy ends up being a good fit for them. And then they also made one more addition on defense, because when you do lose a defenseman, you also got to kind of gain a defenseman a little bit. So when they let Michael Del Zotto go, they knew they needed another defenseman. So in comes another player who's in to try to prove himself, Anton Volchenkov, who is coming over from the New Jersey Devils. He was bought out by the Devils via compliance buyout, not because of poor play or anything like that. He actually was one of the better players for the New Jersey Devils last year. He didn't have any goals, but he had 8 assists. He didn't have any goals, and he only had 8 assists, but that doesn't matter because he's more of a shutdown defenseman anyway. And with shutdown defensemen, you look at the plus-minus. He was a +3 last year, and he stayed out of the box. He only had 20 penalty minutes, and even though he only... And for a shutdown defenseman, 42 shots on goal actually isn't that bad for a pure shutdown defenseman. He was one of the better shot-blocking defensemen for the Devils last year. And so the purpose of his buyout was not because of poor play, was solely for cap space reasons. So he was bought out via compliance buyout. Kind of similar to the way Brad Richards was bought out by the New York Rangers. More because of the cap, not so much because of poor play. Anton Volchenkov, though, the one thing about him, he's 32 years of age, so he's not getting any younger, but he's still has a couple of prime years left in him. He'll be 33 in February of next year, so he has about a couple years and a half left of prime years. So we'll see. I think Anton Volchenkov will have a good year. Again, a different direction from Michael Del Zotto. Michael Del Zotto, more of an offensive defenseman, a power play quarterback with a big shot from the point, moves the puck well. Anton Volchenkov may not move the puck as well as Michael Del Zotto or skate as well as Michael Del Zotto, but he's a pure stay-at-home defenseman, and he's a lot more consistent at his role than Michael Del Zotto is with his role. He's a stay-at-home, shutdown defenseman, blocks shots, and will be very effective on the penalty kill, and will add to a defense group that's already deep with their youngsters. But probably, arguably, other than James Neal, the real big addition, the real big change came in with the coaching staff. Phil Housley, assistant coach Phil Housley, was the only coach who was retained. The rest of the staff was let go, and that included longtime and all-time head coach Barry Trotz. Barry Trotz was the head coach of this team, of this franchise, since day one. They were the only franchise who never had a change in the coaching position, and they set a record, an NHL record, for most consecutive years to start a franchise and then keep the same coach. The franchise opened up in 1998, I believe. Yeah, 1998. And it took from then till 2014 for Barry Trotz to be let go. And what he built in Nashville, the system he built in Nashville, that defensive-minded system with a superstar group of defensemen and spectacular goaltending, is just something you can't replicate, That's why Nashville became more of a defensive team, never known for their group of forwards, but more known for their group of defensemen and goaltenders. But now, the time has come for that legacy to be left behind. General Manager David Poile let Barry Trotz go. He went on to go join the likes of Alex Ovechkin and the Washington Capitals in the hopes that he can turn them back into a playoff team. And in comes former Carolina Hurricanes Stanley Cup winning coach and former Philadelphia Flyers head coach who brought them to the Stanley Cup Finals in 2010, Peter Laviolette. Peter Laviolette is a coach with an excellent playoff resume, but last year, with the time he spent with the Philadelphia Flyers, seemed to wear down, and that's why he was let go early on in the year after the first month, and he was without a coaching job for the rest of the year. Now Peter Laviolette comes in as the head coach of the Nashville Predators and brings in a different philosophy from the kind that Barry Trotz brought. Whereas Barry Trotz brought more of a defensive system, Peter Laviolette likes more of a two-way kind of system with an offensive upside. I'm not going to call him a pure offensive coach because he does love offense. That's probably what he prefers most. But he can also teach his team the defensive side of the game. So he's going to continue to work with that defense tandem that they already have, but he's also going to focus on the group of forwards he has now and the group of forwards he's acquired. With the signings that Nashville made, though, the one downside about all these signings of Olli Jokinen, Derek Roy, Mike Ribeiro, Anton Volchenkov, they now have at least 8 They now have 8 players on their team, including Mike Fisher, 31 years of age or older. They now, this season, have made themselves one of the older teams in the National Hockey League, which means there's not going to be a lot of room for growth for kids coming up this year. But for the few kids that will come up this year, they'll have that perfect mold of veterans and youngsters on their team. I like that. I think that's what you need to be successful. But that now brings us to some of the big questions for Nashville this season. How will the Predators adapt to new coach Peter Laviolette's system? Again, bit of a different direction from Barry Trotz. Not a pure defensive coach, but can still kind of bring the defensive side of the game to his team, but mostly prefers an offensive style. Will Nashville be able to adapt to that and eventually get their first ever 40-goal scorer? They're the only franchise without a 40-goal scorer and a 100-point scorer. What impact will James Neal make? As we all know, the single-season record for most goals by a Nashville Predator in one season is 33, which was set by Jason Arnott in 2008-2009. James Neal is a goal scorer, and Mike Ribeiro is a gifted playmaker, and they have the chemistry together from playing together with the Dallas Stars. So, James Neal, with the kind of impact that he may bring, could result in him surpassing that 33-goal mark. But at the same time, he could be a more undisciplined player and prove that the type of magic he had with Malkin just isn't there with anybody else. So we'll see. I think James Neal's a very talented player, but we'll see. How will the center position shake out? Nashville Predators now, as I said, have a lot of centers now. Mike Ribeiro, Derek Roy, Olli Jokinen, Calle Jarnkrok, one of the good upcoming youngsters for the Nashville Predators, who made an impact when he came up last year. And they also still have Paul Gaustad as their fourth-line center. So it's going to be interesting to see. One possibility is that Olli Jokinen could move to the wing, but we'll see. It's going to be interesting to watch this season. What will become of Mike Fisher after he recovers? Okay, here's the injury. He ruptured his Achilles tendon after being one of the team's most durable players, and he's going to miss at least 4 to 6 months. He's going to miss at least 4 to 6 months, and that's a pretty big loss, actually, for the Nashville Predators. I mean, Mike Fisher, though, he is 34 years of age, so he's not getting any younger. So you got to anticipate that when he does come back, if he does come back, that someone in Nashville is going to get traded. And it could very well be Mike Fisher himself. One of the centers will be traded. So we'll see how it works. And will Seth Jones make a big leap into his second season? Last year, he did some good things last year as a rookie, but maybe didn't have the kind of rookie season that people were anticipating. I think there was a little more expected out of Seth Jones in his rookie year. He didn't even qualify for Rookie of the Year like everyone thought he would. Last year, he had 25 points, which actually is pretty decent for a rookie defenseman, but he was a minus 23. Defensively, he had a lot of issues last year. So, we'll see. We'll see what the kind of impact that Seth Jones makes this year. I think one of the biggest questions of all, though, in my opinion, probably goes back, if I were to really look at it, probably goes back to the goaltender Pekka Rinne. Could he have a recovery type season, or will he look more like a goaltender who's coming off of an injury? That's going to be key for the Nashville Predators this year, and he's going to be one of the players to watch this year. He may be a star goaltender, but when a goaltender misses that much time coming off that big of an injury, it does get you concerned. It's got to get you concerned a little bit. Will Pekka Rinne come back and pick up where he left off, or will he be more like a goaltender who's going to show his injuries, and not be the same Pekka Rinne? That's going to be interesting to watch. At the very least, I can see Rene having a slow start to the season and then maybe picking it up as the season progresses. We'll see, though. We'll see how that works out. As we now go to what the lineup could look like for Nashville this year. Obviously, as I said before, Mike Ribeiro will probably be looked at to be the top line center, and James Neal will be on that top line as well. The biggest question, though, is where James Neal will play. He would play on the right wing side. He played on the right wing side with the Pittsburgh Penguins, playing on that line with Evgeny Malkin and Jussi Jokinen. But it's very possible that he could move back to his natural position at left wing as well. It's not a done deal that he'll be on the right wing side. Whichever side he plays on will depend on who goes on that line. If he plays the right side, which NHL.com projects, then Colin Wilson will move from center to wing and play that top line left wing spot. Otherwise, they'll have Craig Smith come up and move from center to right wing and play that spot, because Craig Smith was their leading goal scorer last year with 24. He also had 52 points last year, a career high, 28 assists, and he was a plus 16 with only 22 minutes in penalties and 215 shots on goal. Craig Smith has the makings to be a real good player in this league. With the kind of year he showed, he's going to be 25 in September, so he's still got a couple of years left to grow. So I have no doubt that Craig Smith could come back and be a big factor, and I think that top line with Ribeiro, Smith, and Neal would actually be very lethal, despite the old-aged Ribeiro. The second line could have Olli Jokinen centering Philip Forsberg and Matt Cullen. Matt Cullen is going to move from center to wing, and he'll play the left side, but he's 37 years of age. That's obviously a big concern. He's 37 years of age, but can actually, for the kind of role he plays, can still play this game. 77 games played last year. He only had 10 goals, but he's never been a big goal scorer anyway. He had 29 assists, 39 points, a +4 rating, 32 penalty minutes, and 134 shots on goal. He actually played some really solid hockey last year, but he's for a player who's not really a major offensive threat, more of a defensive player who scores points in clutch situations. That's where most of his points come. Matt Cullen is a clutch performer. I think him playing on the second line is a little bit much. I think he's meant much more for the third line, but we'll see. Third line, again, could have Calle Jarnkrok, Craig Smith, and Gabriel Bourque. They have those three were put together. Those three were put together after Jarnkrok was called up from the Milwaukee Admirals of the American Hockey League, and they played very well together. Jarnkrok played a very effective role, posing as the third line center. He's ready to play in the NHL full time. There's no doubt about it. And the move from Nashville to Detroit is a big one, because we all know Calle Jarnkrok had the tools to be an NHL player, but there was no way it was going to get done in Detroit. They have way too many youngsters coming up that could be slightly better than Jarnkrok, at least in their eyes, but Nashville, there's a lot of room to grow. So Jarnkrok's ready to play. Hey, and guys like Craig Smith and Gabriel Bourque could help him out, or Colin Wilson, depending on if Craig Smith goes onto that top line. And then the fourth line, Paul Gaustad with Eric Nystrom on the right side and Victor Stahlberg on the left side. Eric Nystrom actually had a pretty good year last year offensively. He had 15 goals, but he only had 6 assists, which made for 21 points. But he had a career worst -25. That was a big concern for Nystrom last year, playing on the off-wing side. He had 60 points and 120 shots, 60 penalty minutes and 120 shots on goal. This is actually a pretty lethal fourth line. It doesn't have a lot in the way of guys who are going to throw down the gloves. I mean, Paul Gostad's kind of a guy who will drop the gloves. But you're putting Victor Stahlberg on that top line, and he's a guy who's known for his smooth skating ability and his ability to shoot the puck. He missed a good amount of time last year, and because he was injury prone, only had 8 goals, 10 assists, and 18 points and a career worst -14. Only though he was out of the box most of the time, only 32 penalty minutes. He had 114 shots on goal only after being a huge part of the Chicago Blackhawks lockout Jordan team that won the Stanley Cup. Stahlberg, to me, though, honestly, I think isn't really playing as high of a role as he should be with this projected roster. To me, he's much more of a top 6 forward if he can come back and be healthy. Or even a third-line forward would suffice. I think that line of Gabriel Bourque, Craig Smith, and Calle Jarnkrok actually has the potential to be the second line rather than the third line. But then you also factor in a guy like Philip Forsberg, a youngster that's coming up who's ready to play in the National Hockey League and is going to do nothing but put major points on the board. And then you look at the 13th and 14th forward slots, Derek Roy and Rich Kloon. Rich Kloon is a grinding type player. He's an enforcer. And he played 58 games last year, and it was known for fighting. This is a guy who drops the gloves. He's a very consistent enforcer for the Nashville Predators. So whether he gets to play in the lineup or not is yet to see. Derek Roy, even though he had such a bad year last year, this one kind of took me as a shock to see him as a scratch. I mean, honestly, I know the projections is that he doesn't play on the starting roster, but honestly, it all comes down to training camp. And Derek Roy, to me, is way too talented to be a 13th forward. To me, you gotta have him in your lineup. I mean, even if not so much as a top line guy or a second line guy, at least on your third line. Maybe take one of the guys who maybe aren't ready to play, who are kind of slowing the team down out of the lineup. Maybe even try to trade one of these guys and get Roy in the lineup, It's a little interesting to see Roy as the 13th forward, but it's not always a bad thing. At the very least, it shows how deep you are with your forward groups, because then you even add in the injured Mike Fisher. You add in a guy like Taylor Beck, who is going to challenge for a spot, but he needs to get signed. Obviously, Taylor Beck needs to be signed. He's a restricted free agent. And then Austin Watson, who could very much be ready to make an impact on the NHL roster. He has 6 games of experience playing in the lockout Jordan year at the end of the year. Only 1 goal, no assists, a -2, and only 4 shots on goal, though. So we'll see. I think this is a guy who could very much be ready to take a spot in the lineup very soon. He'll be 23 in January. So we'll see. It's going to be interesting to watch. On defense, so the forward group for the Nashville Predators, even though it's deeper than it's been in years past, it's still the big weakness of this team. On defense, though, absolutely no problems whatsoever. One of the deepest, if not the deepest, defense corps in the National Hockey League. I mean, come on. Roman Josi and Shea Weber on the top pair. Roman Josi had a breakout year last year. 13 goals, 27 assists, 40 points, although he was a -2, 18 penalty minutes, and 168 shots on goal. The everything except for the plus-minus were career highs, which is unreal. He is proven to be a pure stud on that blue line. And then Shea Weber had arguably his best season this past year, or at least his best season offensively. 23 goals, which ties for a career high, but 33 assists and 56 points, both career highs. A -2, though, 52 penalty minutes, and 195 shots on goal. Shea Weber is just a pure stud. I mean, he'll be 29 on August 14th, so his birthday is just looming around the corner. Or his birthday's in 4 days. So it's going to be very interesting to watch Shea Weber continue to develop and continue to grow as a leader and his offensive stats. On the second defense pair, Matthias Ekholm and Seth Jones. Ekholm had a fantastic rookie year last year. He only had 1 goal and 8 assists, which is 9 points, and he was a -8, but he only had 10 penalty minutes, and he only had 58 shots on goal, but he's more of a shutdown type defenseman anyway, and he's going to continue to grow. I mean, I think even though he was a -8, he still was pretty good for a rookie. You know, he's 24 years of age, and he won't be 25 until next year, so he's got some time to grow. Matthias Ekholm, he's a big body, 6'4", 204 pounds, and adds on nicely as a shutdown defenseman to a guy like Seth Jones, who's more of an offensive type defenseman. We mentioned Seth Jones, maybe not the kind of rookie year that everyone was expecting him to have, but is still a very lethal play. But it still has very high expectations to be a very lethal player. 77 games played last year, 6 goals, 19 assists, 25 points. So the offensive statistics weren't too bad, but he was a -23. That's something that's going to look to be corrected this season. 24 penalty minutes and 100 shots on goal. That's a lot of shots for a rookie and a right-handed shooting defenseman who quarterbacks the power play. Got that big shot from the point. Believe me when I tell you, he's going to be something real special in the future. He is going to be something real special. I can see it. And then, even with that third pairing, again, Anton Volchenkov, who again was brought in from the New Jersey Devils after being brought out via compliance buyout. He'll add some grit and to that blue line, and he'll be a shot blocker. And then Ryan Ellis, who is still a restricted free agent. They need to sign him, and there's no doubt he'll get signed. He's only 23 years of age, and despite the fact he only hulks at about 5'10", 175 pounds, he's still got a lot of talent, and he's got a lot of room to grow. He hasn't quite put up the offensive numbers that many Nashville fans are expecting him to put up just yet. Through 80 games last year, only 6 goals, 21 assists, and 27 points. But he was a +9 with only 24 penalty minutes and 123 shots on goal. And the potential is there. He's got the talent, he's got the potential, and he has the ability to improve on those numbers. He's going to be a good player. Whether he puts up the kind of offensive stats he's expected to put up or not, he's going to be a real good player, whether he develops into an offensive defenseman or a two-way defenseman. And then the undrafted Victor Bartley, who played 50 games last year and had 1 goal, 5 assists, 6 points, an even plus-minus rating, 23 penalty minutes, and 21 shots on goal. He's the 7th defenseman, and that's likely where he'll stay. He'll be 27 in February. He'll likely be the 7th defenseman for the rest of this year. I don't see him playing on the team full-time until next year at the very least. And even with that, they still have guys like Anthony Boteto and Garrett Noonan who could both battle for spots on that blue line. And they're 2 guys who could come up from the American Hockey League and really make an impact. I don't know much about these guys. Boteto's never played an NHL game. Neither is Garrett Noonan. But Garrett Noonan is 23 years of age, and he's got a lot of potential to grow. I think he just finished college. He'll probably spend a year in the American Hockey League, and then come up and be a full-time roster player in the very near future. And then in goal, of course, Pekka Rinne is the starter, and Carter Hutton is the backup, with Marek Mazanic being the third-string goaltender. That's actually a pretty deep goaltending tandem, even with Marek Mazanic included. You got Mazanic, who could battle Hutton for that backup job, and then Rinne, unless he shows the injuries, unless he shows that he hasn't fully recovered from injuries, is still one of the best goaltenders in the game. A 2-time Vezina Trophy finalist, and a guy who could put wins up on the board. And then even with that being said, they also have Magnus Hellberg in the system, who is who was the guy picked one spot ahead of John Gibson of the Anaheim Ducks. And if you're being picked ahead of an eventual superstar like John Gibson, you have to be pretty darn good. And they think Magnus Hellberg is just that. Now, whether he eventually gets his big start in Nashville and becomes their future starter or has it done somewhere else remains to be seen. But Magnus Hellberg has a lot of potential to be a very good goaltender, which now takes us to our top 10 prospects for the Nashville Predators. When I did the Winnipeg Jets video, I forgot to mention how deep their prospect pool was, and they actually have a pretty deep prospect pool after looking at it a second time. For the Nashville Predators' top 10 prospect pool, it's pretty much just as deep, if not deeper. It is a pretty close battle between how deep these two top 10 prospect pools are. I say it could pretty much be a tie, with Nashville's maybe being just a smidget deeper, only for this reason. Most of their prospects are coming straight from the Milwaukee Admirals of the American Hockey League, and most of them are ready to play in the NHL or battle for an NHL roster spot as soon as this year. There's no doubt Philip Forsberg is their top prospect. He was the former 11th overall pick of the 2012 NHL entry draft by the Washington Capitals, was dealt to the Preds in exchange for Martin Erat, former Nashville fan favorite, and Michael Latta. Erat obviously no longer a member of the Caps, but Latta, he's still there and has the potential to be a very good depth player for them. Whereas Forsberg, he has the potential to be a legitimate superstar in this league. He has the potential to be the best player on this Nashville team and possibly even the top scorer on this team. Their second best prospect, Calle Jarnkrok, who was also acquired in the David Legwand trade from the Detroit Red Wings. Legwand's no longer with the Red Wings. He's now with the Ottawa Senators. And, the other piece that Nashville got in that deal, Patrick Eaves, I mentioned him earlier. He's now a Dallas Star. But Jarnkrok, he came into the lineup last year and really impressed. So, the former second-round pick from the 2010 NHL entry draft by the Detroit Red Wings at 51st overall has the potential to be on the roster as well. So you look at the top two prospects, none of them were Nashville Predator grown. Forsberg came from the Washington Capitals, and Jarnkrok came from the Detroit Red Wings. The rest of their prospects, however, Nashville Predator grown. Colton Sissons, Austin Watson, Kevin Fiala, Brendan Leipsic, Felix Girard, UC Saros, Jack Doherty, and Mika Salamaki. All really good prospects with a lot of potential. But of all these guys in the top 10, I think the prospect that sticks out the most in my mind of these eight forwards, one defenseman, and one goaltender, probably would have to be, after really looking at it, it would probably have to be their number 6 prospect, left winger Brendan Leipsic. Brendan Leipsic was my highlight prospect for the Nashville Predators last year, and he is again this year. He was their third-round pick, number 89th overall of the 2012 NHL entry draft, and last season, in 60 games played, 39 goals, 59 assists, and 91 points for the Portland Winterhawks of the Western Hockey League. So Brendan Leipsic just continues and continues to get better. His statistics were not anywhere near as good. His statistics were not as good as they were in 2012-2013 when he played 68 games and had 49 goals, 71 assists, and 120 points, along with a plus 55 rating and 103 penalty minutes. His statistics from this past year did not match up to that, but he's still just as good a prospect now as he was back then, and even when he does come up to the NHL level, he probably won't put up those same kind of numbers anyway. He's probably projected to be more of a Brad Marchand type player or a Brendan Gallagher type player. But either way, this kid is a full-on two-way player. He is a good nose for the net, and a hard-working player, a power forward / playmaker, gets his shots off, has great hands, and is just an absolute hard worker. He is a very good player, and he's going to be on the team in the very near future. It may take a couple of years, but he could, if he plays well enough, the 5'9", 165-pound, 20-year-old has the potential to battle in training camp as soon as next year. He is going to start his professional career this year with the Milwaukee Admirals of the American Hockey League, but there's no doubt in my mind that he is going to be a real good player and at the very least a top 6 forward for the Nashville Predators. They have a lot to look forward to with this kid, as well as the remainder of their prospect pool. Again, between them and the Winnipeg Jets, a pretty equal group of top 10 forwards for prospects for both teams. Nashville's, I say, would probably be just a smidget deeper. Just a little bit. Not a lot, not by a wide margin. They're both very deep pools. Now, as far as the Nashville Predators roster is concerned, the player, in my opinion, who has to be good in order for the Nashville Predators to come back and compete with the other 5 teams in what is going into this year known as the most competitive division in the National Hockey League, the Central Division. The player who has to give them that extra step, without question, has to be Seth Jones. After really thinking about it and looking really hard, you could look at guys like Mike Ribeiro and Olli Jokinen, or even Derek Roy to a lesser extent, and heck, even Anton Volchenkov to a lesser extent, and maybe even James Neal as well to continue his offensive output. But when I look at it, I look at the players who need to improve off their previous season, and Seth Jones is just that player. Again, it wasn't his offensive statistics that were the problem. He had rather solid numbers, again, and 100 shots. I said it before and I'll say it again. 100 shots on goal, 77 games played, 6 goals, 19 assists, and 25 points, and only 24 penalty minutes. He stayed out of the box a lot. But the area of his game that was of absolutely no help to him and the rest of the Nashville Predators team was his play on the defensive end. A minus 23. One of the worst plus-minus players in the NHL, which made him one of the worst defensive players in the NHL last year. This is a guy who, again, possesses that big weapon of a shot from the point and has that great skating ability and puck handling ability. But last year, he wasn't very good in his own end, and that is an area that needs to be improved upon, considering he's projected to be more of a two-way defenseman anyway. So, I hope it works out for Seth Jones. If it does, this is going to be a very good team. This is going to be a very good team moving forward. Hopefully he doesn't go through a sophomore jinx where he has an even worse year, because if he does, then Nashville's not going anywhere, and he's just going to hold that defense court down. Now, if he does have an even better year and improve upon last year, then he's really going to give the team a major jump. Overall, he will be 20 in October, just before the season begins. So that's something to look forward to. Overall, are the Nashville Predators a playoff team? Really, really tough to say, actually. May even be one of the toughest teams to predict this season as far as being a playoff team. I think they are definitely better than last season, and I think they're going to be a very good team, and they're going to be in that mix of teams that are going to battle for a playoff spot. They'll be one of the top 10 teams in the Western Conference for sure. But I don't see it. I just don't see them making it right now. I think the teams in the division ahead of them, like the Dallas Stars and the Minnesota Wild, and especially the St. Louis Blues, Chicago Blackhawks, and the newly improved Colorado Avalanche, those teams are just much better than what the Nashville Predators have to offer right now. I think Pekka Rinne is going to have a very good year, and he could go on to even have another Vezina Trophy type year. I think he won't show any signs of the injury he had. And there's absolutely no problems with that defense. But it's that group of forwards and changing from a more defensive style to more of a shutdown type style and being more of a defensive type unit. That's really going to be the problem here. I think Nashville will be over 500 this year, and I think for them it's just going to basically come down to the last couple weeks of the season, and ultimately they just fade out at during that final stretch of the year and just miss the playoffs. I think they can get into the playoffs and prove me wrong. I'm actually very optimistic about saying that they're not going to make the playoffs this year. I'm not putting all my cards on the table to say that they're not a playoff team this year. I'm just saying that I think from the standpoint of more likely they won't be a playoff team this year. They definitely can be, and they can get back to where they were in the past, especially if their young kids coming up prove to be everything that they're expected to be. But I see it as another year of development. I see some of the older forwards not performing the way they're expected to. And I think Nashville this offseason relied way too much on players who are just coming into the year to prove themselves. So, with those being in mind, even though I think they can make the playoffs and really think, and part of me actually thinks that they will make the playoffs, from an overall standpoint, no. The Nashville Predators this season are not a playoff team. They will miss the playoffs for the third straight season. And that'll do it for episode 142 of Hockey on the Spot and episode number 2 of today's videos. I'm sorry again that I didn't get the Winnipeg Jets episode out on the day of the team, but as I said before, I was busy. So, that's it for these 2 episodes of Hockey on the Spot. We're officially back on track now. Be sure to tune in tomorrow. For tomorrow, we will talk about the Dallas Stars, one of the many Central Division teams that made the playoffs last year. So again, be sure to tune in tomorrow when we talk about the Dallas Stars. So until then, this has been Hockey on the Spot with Brandon Barenfeld. I'm Brandon Barenfeld, and I will see you all again tomorrow. Thank you, and have a great night.